We'll open your Bibles back to 1 Timothy chapter 4, please. 1 Timothy chapter 4. Good to see everybody back tonight. Hope that you had a good afternoon, whether it be productive or restful. We're glad that you were able to make it back tonight. Looking forward to a great week ahead. Let me mention three of the announcements from this morning real quick, just as a reminder to you, because they're somewhat urgent. One, please don't forget the sign-up sheet for the youth devotionals. We need hosts for those throughout 2015. We've got about 5 months or 6 months, I think, filled, but we still have several holes to fill in. None of the months coming up soon, but we'd still like to go in and get that finished out if we can. So if you'd be interested or willing to host a youth devotional and put up with us for one evening this coming year, please sign up as soon as you can, and that way we'll know where we're going to be when. The second list that we've been mentioning for some time for the men who would be interested in doing the invitation on Wednesday night, maybe you've never done it before. Sign up anyway. There's always got to be somewhere that you start, and I've had one or two that's talked to me about maybe doing it and kind of been on the fence about doing it, and not really sure whether they want to kind of put themselves out there. Go on and do it. We need all the men that we possibly can to step up in that regard and participate. It would be good for you. It would be good for the congregation. And so please consider doing that. And we've got several months left where you can sign up for that. You don't, I might have to give this explanation. You don't have to do it for that entire month, by the way. It's one Wednesday in the month, unless you just want to do more. I don't want that to confuse anybody. You're not signing up to do the entire month, so don't worry about that. But if you'd be willing to do that, please sign up as soon as you can so we can get all those holes filled in. And then number three, we got this information up, I think, Wednesday night, but it's only been up since last Wednesday. But the ladies' retreat is coming up in about a month and a half. It is at the Ken Lake Resort up in Aurora, Kentucky, which is just a few miles north of Murray, I think I understood. But ladies, all the information you need for that is on the bulletin board. It's March the 6th and the 7th. The rates for the rooms are up there depending on how many ladies are in the room, and the sign-up sheet to reserve the rooms is up too. And there's been a couple rooms that have already been signed up for, but there's still plenty left, so please sign up as soon as you can. There is a deadline for that. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but I think it's on the flyer too, so you can look at that and see what the deadline is for when you need to sign up before it's too late. But be looking at that information. Maybe you've never gone to that before. I think they have a really good retreat every year, and they have a good speaker coming in, and it's going to be a great weekend. So please look for that information and take advantage of it if you possibly can. This morning, I kind of want to take our minds back to where we started, and then we're going to quickly jump into the remainder of the information I want to cover tonight, because we didn't get through much of it this morning. But anyway, you remember how we started talking about that one person's perspective of Christianity. And really the article I've got those accusations from, I think, was basically an article or a blog post from someone. I don't really know their religious affiliation. It seemed to me, context-wise, they were somewhat skeptical of Christianity, but I have honestly no idea what they claim to be. But the article basically was along the lines of why Christians hate them and why they hate Christians, or why they dislike Christians anyway. And some of those accusations that they had gone through was how that Christians are judgmental, we're unforgiving, or we're hypocritical, or we're condemning. They even threw out the word stupid and stubborn. How that we worry about insignificant things that don't bother anybody else, at least what they claim to be insignificant. I know there could be some interpretation as to what they consider insignificant versus what the Bible would consider insignificant. But really, in general, I would agree with them that we do tend to argue about some pretty insignificant matters. That we automatically assume that everybody else cares about those insignificant matters, And that if anybody disagrees with us about anything, that we automatically hate them. And that Christians are more concerned about numbers than they are Jesus. And we talked about how our immediate reaction to accusations like that are often defensive. It's just not true, and we just dismiss them altogether. Sometimes not fully understanding that, number one, that may not define us individually. Now it may, and we may just be in denial about it, but it may not define us individually. We may not be a person who is unfairly judgmental and condemning and stubborn and all of those different things. But we cannot discount from the fact that there are some, either who are New Testament Christians, who do embody every one or at least a good number of those accusations, and that there are those who claim to be Christians who embody many of those or all of those accusations, which basically cast a bad light on the rest of us that we have to deal with. And we've seen the way that we interact with one another sometimes as Christians, or we've seen the way that Christians or those who claim to be Christians interact with those outside of the church or outside of Christianity, and the name-calling and the browbeating and the belittling and so many things that sometimes we tend to do, not even thinking about it, that are not only unproductive but are hurtful to those we say that we love and are trying to help. And so we focused our attention this morning, and we're going to do so again tonight, on the fact that God has not called us to be those type of people. He's not called us to be a people that are consumed with negativity. He's called us to be a positive people, a group of encouragers who, yes, at times might have to be negative, who might have to be confrontational, who might have to have those type of conversations, but those, generally speaking, being the exception to our general purpose of building each other up and encouraging even those out in the world not to remain in the world, but building them up according to the standard of Christ and really abiding by the golden rule, doing unto them as we would hope and want others to do unto us, Matthew 7 and verse 12. Now, the way that we've been going about that today is by looking at this general reality that we need to be encouragers. It's not an optional matter. We need to be encouragers. But asking the question, why? Why is being an encourager so vital? Why is it such a vital function of Christianity when in reality some perhaps were reared and nurtured in a religious environment that taught them otherwise? That taught that being positive, that being an encourager is just soft Christianity. That talking and emphasizing, talking about and emphasizing things like love and grace and mercy and redemption and forgiveness and all of those great blessings that God has offered to those who would be His children, that's just fluff. That's just soft Christianity. We want to be hard-nosed Christians, right? Well, why do we need to be encouragers? And really the only answer we got to this morning, which by itself would be enough though, is the fact that we need to be encouragers because God said we need to be encouragers. We looked at 7 different passages this morning that pattern the first century disciples in the way that they were encouragers, the way that they were exhorters. Barnabas and Paul and so many others throughout the New Testament who made it their business to encourage those around them. Individuals who, yes, did have to have those types of conversations and had to have those confrontations and might have had to be negative at times, but generally speaking, they were defined by their positive attitude, by their optimism, and by the fact that they sought to build everybody around them up rather than tearing them down. We need to be encouragers because God has told us to be encouragers, to build one another up, and to exhort one another, calling one another to that which is right. Tonight we're going to look at the other 4 reasons that we didn't get to this morning, but all really, in a sense, secondary to the primary one we looked at this morning, but important nonetheless. So just because they're secondary, don't think that this is just fluff, just to kill time. These are all practical scriptural reasons too as to why we need to be encouragers. Reason number 2 is because when we are encouragers, it strengthens those around us. It strengthens those that we are seeking to encourage. Now, that might sound so-and-so to some people. It may not sound to some like it's a legitimate reason why we ought to be so given and committed to being encouragers, but I want you to think for just a second what the only other option to strengthening people is. Weakening them. We can either be a people who are seeking to strengthen people around us, or we can be those type of people that are trying to weaken people around us. Who do we want to be? When we are encouragers, we are strengthening those around us. Look in John chapter 13, verses 34 and 35. Jesus is talking to His disciples here. And He says to them, verse 34, "A new commandment I give unto you, that you love one another, even as I have loved you, that ye also love one another." Why, Lord? Why such the emphasis on love? Well, because by this shall all men know that you are my disciples, if you have love one to another. You know, we live in a world, not just today, but this has defined the world ever since the beginning practically. We live in a world that can be and often is cruel and unforgiving. We live in a world where selfish motives of men cause sincere people to suffer. That's the world we live in, the outside world. But you know what? God established the church to be a contrast to the world, right? You know, in the New Testament, when you see that word world used, it can be used in different contexts. It can refer to the physical world around us, this planet or this universe. It can refer to an age like in Matthew chapter 16. But you know, a lot of times, in fact, possibly more often than not, when you see the New Testament writers referring to the world, or you see that word translated world in context, it's talking about the entity that is in contrast to the church. In other words, you have the church, which is comprised of the righteous, the children of God, and then you have the world, which is everybody else. And so you've got the world that can be cruel and unforgiving and that just torments sincere people, makes them suffer beyond imagination. But then you have the church, which by technical definition is what? You look at that word church translated, and that word translated into the word church refers to us as being the called out ones. Those who have been distinguished, those who have been made different. We have been called out. Called out of what? Out of the world that is cruel and unforgiving and causes people to suffer. Now let me ask you something. If we claim to be the called out ones, and yet as the church we're still cruel and we're still unforgiving and we still cause people to suffer, are we really the church? But that's the world, right? The world is cruel. The world is unforgiving. The world causes people to suffer. And we're the church. We're different, or at least we're supposed to be. And yet, how then can we as Christians who call ourselves the church treat people in the exact same way? Cruel, unforgiving, causing people to suffer. We have been called out to be different in a world that lives to tear each other down. What better way can we distinguish ourselves among many than, at least initially in the minds of people, be a people who are committed to building other people up? Going back to John chapter 13, Jesus said, I'm giving you this new commandment. I want you to love one another. Let me ask you this. How do you treat those that you love? Do you criticize them with the intent to destroy? Do you browbeat them? Do you verbally abuse them and mock them openly? Are you cruel to them? Are you less than forgiving toward them? Are you unfairly judgmental about them? Now, those that we love, we don't criticize with the intention of destroying. Our love for them, whether it be a husband or wife, whether it be our children, whether it be our parents, any other family, whether it be friends, those that we claim to love, we treat them in a special way. We're there to lift them up. We're there to build them up. We're there to encourage them. We're there to help them. Now that doesn't mean that a parent at times doesn't have to have that tough conversation with their child. That doesn't mean a friend doesn't have to confront another friend on occasion. But you know what? That doesn't define the relationship. What defines the relationship is kindness and peace and harmony. Strengthening each other. We need to be encouragers because it is a selfless act whose sole intention is to benefit the life and the spirit and the attitude of others. We need to be encouragers because it strengthens those around us to be better themselves. All right, number 3. Why do we need to be encouragers? Well, because it helps create a true family environment. Now, this is kind of in connection to what we just got done talking about with regard to the connection between love and encouragement versus hatred and wrath and anger and destruction. But you know, the New Testament time after time after time refers to the church or indicates that the church is supposed to be a Christian family, right? How many times throughout the Scriptures do you see Christians referred to as brothers and sisters in Christ? James 2:1. Really, you can look at the beginning of practically all of Paul's epistles, and he refers to the church, those Christians to whom he's writing as his brethren, dearly beloved. Is it not the case that God is referred to as our Father? Is it not the case that we are referred to as His adopted children, born again unto His family, John 3, Romans 8? Is Christ not referred to at times as our elder brother and the only begotten Son of the Father? Now you look at all of these designations that the New Testament bears out with the way that we are to relate to one another, and tell me that we can come to any other conclusion but that the church is a family, or at least it's supposed to be. And since we are a family, is it not the case that we need to function like any family should? Problem is, a lot of times the church does act like a family, but it acts like a dysfunctional family. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about Christians acting like a family ought to act. Not like those nutcases you see on reality TV, like families ought to act. Like we love one another, for crying out loud, right? And so is it not the case that the church, we as Christians, should be a people, as a family, that's dedicated to supporting one another? You ever seen a family that didn't support one another? I know you have. How did you look at that family? Well, you probably pitied them because there wasn't any support. Is it not the case that we as a Christian family should not encourage one another and push one another along? You ever seen a family that wasn't committed to encouraging one another? You ever seen parents who didn't encourage their children? I know you have. And how did you look at that family? You pitied them, bless their hearts. They're going to have a rough way to go. Is it not the case that we as a Christian family ought to comfort one another? Bear one another's burdens? You ever seen a family where there wasn't even enough love to comfort one another or to help one another along within reason anyway? You have, and you pitied them. And yet so often Christians can function day after day after day with no support, no encouragement, no comfort, no bearing of one another's burdens, and we just shrug it off. Business as usual, right? Isn't all of this ultimately supposed to be a demonstration of God's love to us? Isn't the support that we give to one another, the encouragement, the comfort, the love, and the mercy, and the forgiveness, and all of those great qualities of God, aren't we, just as much as God shows them to us, aren't we called to show them to one another as a family? If so, then we've got to be encouragers. We don't have an option. And we need to be encouragers because it creates that family environment that God intended to define His church, to define His kingdom. And it produces the type of family environment that, guess what? People that are in the world are looking to be a part of. You show me a church that's growing, and I'll show you a church that really loves one another and shows it, that encourages one another, that has that family environment that we're talking about, that others want to be a part of. I'm not talking about gimmickry. I'm talking about Christians reflecting the love of Christ. And if you want to call that a gimmick, then Christ was the biggest hoaxer in the history of the world, because that's what He taught us to do, and that's who He taught us to be. Love one another as a family. Number 4, not only do we need to be encouragers because God told us to, because it strengthens those around us, because it creates that family environment that we're supposed to have. Number 4, we ought to be encouragers because if we're not encouragers, guess what? We are discouragers. There is no status quo in that regard. When a church is full of active encouragers, it builds us up, it motivates us, it pushes us forward. You take that same church and you take the encouragement away, and what's going to happen? Well, you're going to take away the building up, you're going to take the motivation, you're going to take away the being pushed forward. And on the other hand, that church, instead of being encouraged to be built up and to be motivated and to be pushed forward, then it's going to do the exact opposite. It's going to shrivel up and it's going to die. People will become discouraged. They will become spiritually discharged. And when a person is in an environment where they expect to be encouraged and the exact opposite happens, what do they sometimes and typically tend to do? They begin looking for the encouragement that they need. Notice I didn't say the encouragement that they wanted. Yeah, they want it. I'm not denying that. But I purposefully did not say the encouragement that they wanted, because I don't want us to think about encouraging one another as an optional matter. I'm talking about a people who are lacking the encouragement that they need. What are they going to do? They're going to start looking for it elsewhere, right? Tell me I'm lying. It happens. So you show me a church that's not an encouraging church, and I'll show you a church that's already dead. And they probably don't even know it. Discouragement is going to help absolutely nobody get to heaven. And so if we're not encouraging people to get to heaven, guess what we are by default doing? We're discouraging them from going to heaven, which means that we are encouraging them to be lost. We're not attracting them more and more to God. We're pushing them farther and farther away. Why do we need to be encouragers? Because if we're not encouraging people around us, we are discouraging them in every conceivable way. And that, friends, simply is not right. We need to be encouragers. Number 5, and I think as far as practical purposes, I'm not going to say this one is more important than any of the other, because I think they're all equal in importance. But for anybody, if there is anybody, I'm not saying there is, and I don't know if there is, but if there were anybody who listened to anything we said this morning or anything that we've said thus far tonight and said, that's just fluff, that's just soft Christianity, where's the hellfire and brimstone at that's supposed to define Christianity? Where's the discipline? Where's the confrontation? Tell me where it is. This is where it is. We need to be encouragers, because when we are encouragers, it puts us in a position to offer criticism in a more constructive way when that is necessary. I'm going to be really, really honest right now. If I know, and I hope I've been honest the whole time, don't get me wrong. When I know a critic, I'm not talking about the person who occasionally offers criticism. I don't consider them a critic. That's a friend. I'm talking about a critic. And you know what I mean. Somebody who all they do is criticize. Never have a kind word to say, never have anything encouraging to say. Anytime their mouth is open, they're tearing somebody or something down. People like that, when they offer criticism to me, even if it were otherwise valid, guess what happens? It goes in one ear and out the other. In fact, it probably don't even come in one ear. It's just completely blocked altogether. I kind of mentally do with that what I would do if I ever got an anonymous letter from someone. You know what you do with those? File them in cabinet 13, the little round one on the floor. Just discard it. When a critic, someone who all they do is criticize, when a critic offers criticism, guess how people respond? Shrug it off. That's just old so-and-so being old so-and-so, and I'm not going to pay a bit of attention to them. Even if it's a valid criticism, that's the sad thing. Even if it's a valid criticism, when a person is generally defined as being a critic, even valid criticism holds absolutely no water whatsoever. It's just shrugged off. Because that person has no credibility at all in offering criticism, because that's all they do. It's like the boy that cried wolf. You know that old story? Every day, just because he would cry wolf, get everybody riled up. They'd come running, found out, hey, there's no wolf. Day after day after day that happened until what? One day a wolf showed up, the boy cried, and what happened? Nobody came. Why? Because he had lost all credibility. Critics, as defined, those who only have criticism, those who are only negative all the time, critics have no credibility at all. At least not with rational people. None. The only time criticism can be constructively offered is when it is offered by an individual who otherwise is an encourager. Pure and simple. Now, the critic might make waves. They might cause a ripple. They might get people all riled up, which is typically all they want to do anyway. Not going to have any productive end. The only time criticism can be constructively offered is when it comes from someone who otherwise is a positive person and encourager. Pure and simple. Proverbs chapter 17, verse 10. Solomon said, "A rebuke enters deeper into one that hath understanding than 100 stripes into a fool." Know what Solomon's saying there? A single word of criticism is going to be much more effective than a slew of criticisms. If someone who is otherwise an encourager, a positive person, ever says anything that's negative, guess what? People pay attention. Because that is uncharacteristic. Something has got to be wrong. On the other hand, when the critic offers criticism, nobody pays attention. Nobody cares. Because that's just who they are. How I'm remembered one day after I'm long gone is honestly of little consequence to me because I'm not going to be around to know it. But if nothing else were ever to be said of me, I hope that nobody would ever have to say that I was a discouragement to them. I hope that one day, if anybody ever remembers me, and it doesn't matter to me if they do, but if they did, I hope there's, of all the things that could negatively be said about me, I hope it's never said that someone remembered me as a negative person, as a discourager, as a critic. We have got to be encouragers. We don't have an option. Because criticism is a reality. Criticism is necessary. I don't want anybody to take anything that I've said today and leave with the impression that Andy is saying we should never be critical of anybody or anything. Number one, I've never said that, so, you'd be lying. But number two, it's just not the truth. Criticism is absolutely necessary at times, on occasion, but will only be effective if otherwise, throughout our lives, in our interaction with others, we have been encouragers. We need to be encouragers. For all of the reasons that we've mentioned today and so many more that we just don't have time to talk about, we need to be encouragers. Do we want to avoid those labels and those misnomers that we mentioned earlier that so often have come to define Christianity in the minds of the majority of this world? I know that we do. We want to shed that type of reputation. Do we want to be the best Christians and the best servants and the best husbands or wives or citizens or friends or whatever we may be? Do we want to be the best person that we possibly can be? Now, friends, if so, we need to take Paul's advice to young Timothy, 1 Timothy 4:13, when he said, "Till I come, give attention to reading, give attention to exhortation, and be diligent in those things." Give yourself wholly to them, so that your progress may be manifest unto all. Tonight, maybe it's the case that you're here and you're not a child of God. If that's the case, then it's a tragedy, and we want you to correct that. Come in faith, repenting of your sin, confessing that faith, being immersed in water, to become one of God's own children. Be added to His church, and look forward to life once this life is over. Maybe you are a child of God, but you've gone back into the world, and you're being controlled by sin, and you need to correct that. Come back, repentance, confession, prayer, and He'll restore you unto your own. Whatever your need is, come now. While together we stand and sing.
No turning back.